And so my question is, what are you going to do for 35 years? There's only so many golf courses. There's only so many shuffleboards, and there's only so many episodes of Oprah you can deal with. Right. At some point, if you don't have a reason to get out of bed every morning, you stop getting out of bed, and people don't thrive.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Kestra Out Loud, the Advisor Podcast, where we find the voice of the independent financial advisor. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host, Maria Bethel.
Thank you. Thank you. I love the applause. Studio of fans. No, I'm kidding.
And we have a very special guest today, Eric Brotman, who is the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors. And, I was doing my research, and I'm going to list off. Listen to this alphabet soup here. He is an AEP, CPWA, CFP, CHFC, CASL, RICP, of course, and CEO of BFG Financial Advisors. So, Eric, thank you so much for coming in today.
I'll answer to anything. I'm currently working on my EIEIO, which is really complicated, but as soon as I get it, I'll let you know.
I'm like, there's a lot of C's in there.
There's some C's.
You are well designated.
I am certifiable is what it is. Yeah.
Certifiable. I kind of like that one.
Yeah, no question about it.
So there are a lot of... Eric actually has his own podcast, extremely successful, Don't Retire, Graduate, and would love to dive into your expertise on the marketing side, especially your podcast, which you started from nothing and has been extremely successful. Yeah. So there's, if you look at financial advisors, the average advisor about 57, 58 years old. And I think a lot of the mindset is that traditional marketing, television, radio, maybe some physical mailers, send out a direct mail campaign. But podcasting is really the new modern marketing medium that goes deeper, goes wider, lives forever. I think you were saying before we were talking about the show. And we really want to dive into kind of how that can add value to an advisor's business. And, I think Maria, you had some questions specifically around even other business owners being able to use this, not just financial advisors, but, share a little bit about that don't retire, but graduate mindset and how you came up with that.
I'm happy to. I think that retirement in its traditional sense, the way we've thought about it for truly centuries, is a fate worse than death. It really is a retreat. It's a disappearing act, and in the modern world, you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, for example, and if it just says retired, no one's going to click and say, oh, there's somebody I really need to meet and connect with.
Oh my gosh.
So it just makes no sense to have retired. Even if what you're doing is volunteering, you're a volunteer somewhere. You have some purpose. So the retirees who we work with, and we work with multi-generational families around the country. The retirees who we work with who are the happiest have a couple of things in common. They have three things in common. One of them is financial, and that is that they're debt-free. One of them is medical, and that is they have their health, which arguably without that, it's hard to enjoy much of anything.
Right.
But the third thing is, and I think maybe, I don't know if it's the most important, but it's equally important, is they have purpose. They have a reason to get out of bed every morning. Retirement was created at a time where it was putting old people out to pasture. And, there was one of the four founders of Johns Hopkins Hospital in the 1800s put out a thesis that basically said that your useful years are between 20 and 40. You begin to get less useful at 40, and by 60, you're darn near useless. Thankfully, that's no
encouraging.
Longer. Yeah, no,
so encouraging.
So I want to sign up for that.
Sign me up.
So today, retirement is based on this concept that there's some moment in time, whether it's government imposed, whether it's employer imposed or industry imposed, or whether it's just this concept that there's a day where you have to stop everything, stop working. Why? What are you going to do? It's one thing when Social Security, when we first got started with Social Security, the idea was that folks were entering the workforce at 18. They were working until 65 and they were dead at 72. I mean, people really didn't live that long. Now, folks are 24, 25, 26 when they enter the workforce. Forget the fact that they're $100,000 in debt from student loans.
Right.
They want to retire when they're 55 and they could live to be 107.
Yeah.
And so my question is, what are you going to do for 35 years? There's only so many golf courses. There's only so many shuffleboards, and there's only so many episodes of Oprah you can deal with. Right. At some point, if you don't have a reason to get out of bed every morning, you stop getting out of bed, and people don't thrive.
Yeah, you see that all the time. I hear so many financial advisor stories about they've been working so hard, and they get to that retirement date, and they do nothing, and then you see their emotional health decline, their physical health decline, and they're sitting in a lazy boy watching TV.
And not thriving. So so we wanted to revisit the definition of retirement, so that instead of a retreat or a surrender, it was a graduation to 2.0 or 3.0 or the next phase of your life. And so to me, retirement is not the absence of work. It's the absence of needing to work.
Yeah.
So if you hit financial independence to where you get to do anything you want, why would that be the lazy boy chair?
Yeah. And I love that you've turned this entire concept into a podcast.
Yeah.
Right?
This is what you're talking about on your podcast, right? All of these topics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So some of them are related to financial independence, and there's some quantifiable pieces of that. And some of it's about, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yeah. And it's funny, we stop asking people that at like 7.
Yeah.
Like, why not ask somebody?
If you haven't decided by now, it's too late.
Right. I mean, if you haven't figured, like, I have a daughter who's 10 who hasn't yet decided if she's coming into the family business, and I think that's an epic failure. So to me, why not ask somebody 57 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes.
They freeze.
Absolutely.
Because if you stop growing, you stop learning, you stop thriving. What's the point?
If you stop growing, you're going in the wrong direction.
In some direction, yeah.
In some kind of direction.
If somebody says, what's your plan for retirement? And you say every day above ground's a good day. I don't think that, I think that's kind of an empty plan.
I would be inclined to agree with you on that. So you're obviously a business owner. You're doing this podcast. So you are aware of how important communication is and how important it can be with your clients. On a regular basis, you're communicating with your clients about their major life goals and their challenges, and this can be very emotionally driven conversations. So is that fair to say that most of these conversations have an emotional backbone to them?
If they don't, they're not going to resonate with anyone. You know, I don't think anyone wants to sit down with their financial advisor or any other advisor and go through a time value of money equation.
Right.
You know, the math to me is by far less important than determining what, how much money you have. You know, they say he who dies with the most toys wins. I don't think so. I think he who dies with the most toys still dies. Right. You're probably better off figuring out what it can do for you and what it can do for others, and your philanthropy and your legacy and your purpose and making a difference not only for your family but for your community. There's so many different ways to use your own success to empower others rather than to die with a big account balance. Who cares?
So getting this story out there, getting your message out there to end clients, how did you decide that? Was there a pivotal moment you said, oh, I'm going to do this podcast? Was there some kind of moment that made you make that decision?
There was. I went to a conference, a FinCon conference in 2017. And the premise of the FinCon conference is that's where money and media meet. And I thought, well, we're all authorities. By virtue of our designations and all the alphabet soup, we're authorities. We know what we're talking about, but unless you can get others to act, you're not an influencer. So how do you become an influencer?
Right.
So I went to FinCon and I truly had no idea what I was doing there. I mean, there were like 3,000 people there and they were speaking a language that wasn't mine. Yeah. And they were talking about everything from specs on microphones to monetization to all these things. But it was the warmest community. And I met a bunch of different vendors there and folks who were able to help me. And I decided not to start a podcast, but to guest on them. Okay. Because it is much easier, first and foremost, it's much easier to gain some exposure to an audience if there's already a built-in audience. So I know that Kestra Out Loud is going to be all over the place. So it's good for me to guest on this show because tens of thousands of people will hear every episode.
Yes. 100%.
Yes.
Maybe 100,000. But
more likely.
My point is, if you guest on shows, then you can determine. So I did that, and I signed a contract with a company called Interview Connections out of Providence, Rhode Island. They were amazing, and they got me 20 guest spots on 20 different podcasts. That's awesome. And I learned the difference between a host who really knew what he or she was doing and one who didn't, someone prepared versus someone who was winging it. And I learned how to do this. And then I decided it was time to do my own podcast. And I used that same group at Interview Connections to put my one sheet out and to determine what the audience that I wanted and to find guests. So they helped me find guests. I'm interviewing incredible people. Gene Chatsky from the NBC Today show reached out to me and said, I'd like to be a guest on your show. And I thought I was being punked. Awesome. But it did happen. And she's an amazing, amazing human. And I just interviewed one of the faculty members who created the RICP program at American College, just a brilliant guy. And that show will be live in a couple of weeks. And it's just amazing, the people who are now reaching out to me. And it's much easier to get chosen to be on various podcasts if you have your own podcast. Because
how did you figure out the content? Like what's resonating with the listeners out there, the end investor?
I think what happens is, first of all, you determine how many people listen to the show and how many subscribe and what kind of feedback you're getting. But for me, the podcast, I had to make sure I didn't quit my day job. Yeah. And so I tell a lot of financial advisors who want to do this, I said, you are not a podcaster. You're a financial advisor with a podcast, and there's a really important difference. So I'm not a podcaster for a living. I have producers who we've hired who handle everything for us. We built a small studio, and it was very inexpensive to create. And so now I can know that there are guests lined up. I can research them a little bit. I can show up. I can do the show, and then I can get on with my day as a financial advisor. It's not consuming me such that it's taking us away from the business. So, and some of the shows that I was on went viral. And so what happens is, on any of these shows, you have to have a call to action.
Yes. You
must have a call to action, and it must be simple. And it's not enough to say, go to our website for more information.
Right.
Boring. No one's doing that. So what we did, I published an ebook, and it was on 4 strategies where people could pay less taxes, because who doesn't want that? Yeah. And I put it out, and I made it free, and I created a website for it that was easy to remember, so that when I guested on podcasts, instead of them trying to remember my name even, I said, if you go to lowtaxbook.com, you can download this information. It's free, and so forth. And that would put folks into our drip messaging. So it got them into Constant Contact and all of that. I was on a show called Bigger Pockets Money, which is an amazing show. And it's primarily for real estate investors, but they wanted to talk taxes. And so the hosts had me on, and it was both a audio and video. So it was on YouTube, and it went viral. Tens of thousands of people heard it. I had more than 1,000 people download our ebook in a week.
Because you gave them a valuable piece of content that could help them, and you weren't asking them to meet with you, to call you. You were giving them something valuable. Then they were added to your drip campaign. So they're going to continue to get valuable information from you, which then eventually the goal is that they become a lead into your practice.
Well, and a lot of them have. I mean, we now... historically, in our business, it's been this whole idea that you have to be referral only, and that referrals are the very best way to get business. And yet, for those of us old enough to remember the training we received early in our careers, which for me was in the early 90s, it was literally asking somebody to pull out their address book and tell me who are the people I can call and annoy. Like
the rotary phone.
Who wants that? So now I can freely say that podcasting has become a greater source of new business for our firm than referrals. And that's not to say we're not referable and that we're not getting introductions. And of course we are, and that's wonderful. But this reaches so many people. I mean, I got calls from people as far away as China who were expats who had things to talk about maybe coming back to the States and can we talk? And my little YouTube video made it around the world.
I love the trackability of the digital marketing though. So you have that simple call to action, lowtaxbook.com. And now you can see when people are hitting your website. You can remarket to them, with cookies. You've got, how many people, what they're doing, where they are, and you're just continually building that pipeline, and it's all trackable compared to traditional media, right? It doesn't
like television.
Doesn't even compare.
Yeah, you can't really track that, to the minute degree that you can.
Well, not only that, but people don't act on what they see on television or radio.
Right.
I've been doing Sunday morning news on NBC in Baltimore for 6 years. Once a month, I'm on the news and I do the financial report, and it's a 3-minute segment, and it's seen by everybody. I'm recognized at bagel shops around town, like, hey, you're that guy. I've never gotten a client from that experience, not one in 6 years, because people don't pick up the phone and call based on that. In fact, the ones who do are saddled with debt and think we're going to pay it off for them somehow. So television, it's great for your local market. It's great. It has opened some interesting doors and people are fascinated by it, but it didn't move the needle professionally. And radio is worse because radio, you can't take a call to action while you're driving.
Right. And
radio shows, when they're gone, they're gone.
They don't live on in perpetuity. Like a podcast can.
I still get calls from people who heard me on a podcast or who heard one of our episodes that was 9 months ago. It's still as if it's brand new. If you're on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, all the various sources, you can binge listen. And for people who have commutes, what could be easier than finding somebody you really like and binge listening?
Yeah, this actually reminds me of something, because you're saying I started off doing guest spots. Yep. And I think that's a really great thing to bring up, a great point, because we have built out an infographic at Kestra that we're able to put in front of financial advisors. And this infographic drills down, here's the podcast at the highest level. And this doesn't matter whether you're a guest on a podcast or you host your own, because the way you can actually use the content from that podcast is the same, whether you're a guest or you have your own podcast. So I think it's a great place to start if you're intimidated by having to, who am I going to guest? Who am I going to have on? What am I going to say? What you did, like a trial and error almost. Hey, I'm going to be a guest and I'm learning what hosts are doing this, what's working, what's not. And you're able to take that. And then you're able to create a blog post out of the podcast content. You're able to create an infographic or a one-pager that becomes more valuable information that you can put in front of clients who are, let's say, in your drip campaign like you're using. So we have that asset available for financial advisors. So it's actually a guide, a path that they can follow that is very similar to what you did. You went out there and did it on your own, and now we have valuable information that can help other advisors follow in those footsteps.
Guesting is an incredibly easy way to spread a message, and it's very inexpensive.
Right.
And you can pitch yourself if you have the time or the staff to do it, or you can hire folks to help you do that. That's something I hired professionals. And what happens is I get a list of, here's 20 shows we think we may want to pitch you on. Which ones do you think are good fits or not? And the success rate of them being able to get me a guest spot has been incredibly high. And we pay for only the successful guestings. So you sign up for 1 a month or 2 a month or 4 a month or whatever you want to do. And it's not like you're paying like you used to pay for certain marketing campaigns that go to 10,000 people in the hopes of getting 2 calls.
Right.
This is, you're paying as you go, but it's for successful shows. And then what happens is you build this incredible media reel out of the ether. And now you become a more attractive guest because you can say, I've been on these various shows. And so, Reuters had me up to Times Square to do a televised interview, which was very cool. And it's because of some of the things that they had seen on television and podcasting. I was on Mary Lou Henner's show, which is, for those of us old enough to remember Taxi, that's what we talked about on the show mostly, actually. But it was just kind of a cool thing to have people reach out to you, and they have different audiences.
That's fantastic.
So you have built out your podcast. You're still doing these guest spots, but you are hosting your own podcast. For the listeners out there, what would you say was the most important thing or the biggest challenge that you had along the way? And maybe that impart of wisdom can help somebody else not make that same mistake.
You asked a 2-part question that has 2 different answers. One is, what's the most important piece? And one is, what is the biggest challenge?
Okay.
The most important piece is authenticity. You must be yourself. Don't fake it. People will see through it. You have to be yourself. You have to be human. You have to be relatable. And you're just having a conversation. The fact that someone might be listening to it in China is an added bonus, but you're just having a conversation. So from that standpoint, the most important thing is to truly be yourself and not to try and put on some kind of airs that you're, we're not trying to be the next, the next celebrity. This is not about celebrity. So that's first. In terms of the biggest challenge, the biggest challenge, I think, is trying to make sure that the content that you put out and that the guests that you put out, if you're going to host it yourself, make sure you've really read up on your guests.
Yeah.
Because if you're speaking to a best-selling author, you don't necessarily have to have read his or her book, but you sure better be familiar with it. You better get the Cliff Notes version or something, and have a sense. And so you ask for their one sheet, and they'll give you a handful of questions that they'd like to be asked so that you can tee them up. It's really important that you allow your guests to tell people how to reach them, and to put in your show notes their relatability and how to reach them, because then they'll blast that out to their audience. So my guests have larger audiences than my show. So it's not even how many downloads of the show there are that matter. It's how many shares of the show once it's live. If 400 people listen to my show, but one of the guests has a Twitter profile with 20,000 people on it, my show just went much bigger than the folks who actually caught it on Apple Podcasts. So I think you have to, the challenging thing is making sure that you, as a host, know enough about your guests to help them shine so that they can be great, and then they'll share it.
Yeah, that's great.
So if an advisor is thinking of launching their podcast, what kind of time commitment should they be expecting to invest into? It's a pretty big endeavor, but what's your advice to those advisors?
Well, guesting, first and foremost, there is no time commitment. If you have somebody who does this, if you do 2 shows a month, you're going to spend an hour or 2 a month doing an interview, and that's it. If you want to host your own show, it is helpful to have some of the equipment that you need. It's not expensive. I think it cost us $600 for everything we needed. It was not a big deal. Yeah. But you will need to determine what's going to happen with the production of the show. The time-consuming piece of this is not the recording of the interview or even finding the guest. It's making the show great and polishing it and then publishing it and doing all of that. I would no sooner do that for myself than I'd give myself a root canal. So we have a producer in Tampa that does an amazing job with us. They built a website for the show, and they make sure the show hits all the various sound stripes and all the things that I know nothing about, and I don't need to. Yeah. It's really okay. So I would say your time commitment can be small. Mine is 2 for the show that I host. It's 2 hours a month.
Oh, that's
2 hours a month, and that's 2 episodes. We record them both on the same day. So we have the producer. We do a 9:30 and a 10:30 recording on a Friday, once a month, and that's the next month's worth of shows. It's 2 Thursdays coming out, so it's not a time commitment. If you hire some people to help, if you have to produce the show, and you have to cut the audio and remove the ums and ahs and all the things that or somebody sneezes in the middle of the episode, or they're on their home phone in the episode and the dog barks and you got to cut it out.
Yeah.
I mean, these things happen, and some of it's okay because it's human, and some of it's unprofessional, and you sort of want to work around that. So if you have a lot of that, a producer, a production company can, again, relatively inexpensively make it sound professional.
So you would say it is well worth the money to hire the people or contract individuals like a producer to do those types of processes for you so that you can focus on being a financial advisor
all day
and your guest spots. Worth it.
I do not want to be a podcaster. I do not want to be a producer. I definitely don't want to be an editor, and I don't want to understand any of the technology around it. I want to be a financial advisor, and I want to become more of an influencer to go with the authority. And I think in order to be an influencer, you need to have a media message. And that does mean audio, podcasting, or video, YouTube. It does mean a blog and regular content. And it does mean having social media presence and all those things. But for me, I wanted to outsource virtually all of that. I'm not a designer. I'm not an IT person, and I'm not a podcaster. I'm a financial advisor who wants to get a message out. And to me, the ROI has not only been positive, it's been off the charts. Yeah. So it's paid for itself. Now, some people may not have that experience immediately, and there's a tendency, and we talked about this a little bit offline, there's a tendency to think, hey, it didn't work in the first 2 months, I quit.
Right.
You can't quit. So for now, the Don't Retire, Graduate piece of this is becoming a brand. I'm publishing a book in June by the same title, which is then going to lead itself to a workbook and an online course and an online community. And we've got very, very big plans to try and get this message to as many people as possible. But it all started from going to FinCon when I didn't know what a podcast was, literally 3 years ago.
And this whole journey that you've gone through, what I love is that you've actually launched a business where you can teach advisors on how to build a better business. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I started Brotman Consulting Group to help other financial advisors figure out how to become influencers, because through trial and error, I've taken my lumps, and I think I can help folks not take quite as many. And that's usually a good thing. Learn from other people's mistakes.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's not that is not to suggest that I have it all figured out and that I'm making no mistakes. I reserve the right to make all new mistakes and make them grandly. I'm just going to try not to make the same ones again. So, yes, I started a consulting practice, and we have a website at brotmanconsultinggroup.com that talks about the various services. Some of them are on site. Some of them are related to teams and cultures. Some of them are related to being an influencer and podcasting and publishing. And, you know, I now have resources for all of those various things and a platform to meet more of them. So, I think for advisors who want to do this, they can either poke around a conference hall, or they can work with a consultant who knows what to do and can get them in front of the right vendors and just take care of it. So it really comes down to the individual.
So only 8% of financial advisors are doing podcasts today.
8%.
8%. What would you say to any advisors that are just afraid to start into this medium?
I would say the 92% of folks who aren't either hosting a podcast or using podcasts were the same 92% who didn't have a website or didn't have email or didn't use LinkedIn. Or I think there's early adopters.
Right.
And the podcast space is not new. We're not early adopters. There's a million shows. And so this is not an early adopter. This is not a unproven thing. Right. This is something that definitely works. It's just a matter of having a message and being unique and being authentic. That's why we have editors. Because of explosions in the hallway. That's perfect. You can either edit that out or we can have fun with it. I don't know, whatever you want to do.
I'm going to need a new one of those, whatever it was.
That's
well, the funny thing, it was actually the sign that says quiet, we're recording.
Oh.
Someone knocked it down.
No way. Yeah, oh my gosh. That's funny.
I thought this was not a liquid lunch, but apparently whatever's happening there happened.
So we want to ask you a quick personal question as the way we wrap up the show. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I was going to play professional football.
I hope you decided by the age of 7.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was gonna play for the Baltimore Colts, which created lots of interesting problems. I was small, but I made up for it by being slow. And I love it. And B, the Baltimore Colts don't exist anymore, and so I couldn't have done that even if I wanted to. So professional football was out relatively quickly. I actually did some aptitude testing at a place called Johnson O'Connor Research Center, and they're all over the country, and they do aptitude testing that is like a 2-day battery of things that point you in the direction of where your career, not only what you might be successful doing, but what you might love doing. And I love this story because they grade you from 1 to 100 on every single thing you can think of, and one of them is tweezer dexterity. So for surgeons and such, you know. Okay. Listen.
We're like, can you define those words, please?
Do you have fine motor skills, Austin? Come on.
Austin's answer is no.
Out of 100, mine was a 5. I couldn't even play the game Operation without the funny bone, so I knew I wasn't going into surgery. Right. The sight of blood made me want to pass out. I wasn't going into medicine, but it pointed me in the direction of either business or law, and specifically in finance. So I went to college, and like all great financial advisors, was an English major and a psychology minor. But I learned communication. I went to work for a brokerage firm in the legal department on my way to law school, and I fell in love with the brokerage business and never went to law school. So some of it was an accident, but the pro football thing, I think it's probably over now.
You could bring back the team. You could resurrect.
I could. I could. I would love to. That was a great part of our town's history. So.
Maybe if we do a follow-up podcast in a few years, you just never know what's going to happen. It's going to be a movie about Eric Brotman resurrecting the colds.
Here's the problem. Who would play you in a movie about your life?
Scarlett Johansson.
Okay, excellent choice. And how about you, my friend?
Probably Jet Li.
Excellent choice. See, for me, it would be Hugh Grant. And so if you understand, and some of that is just because of my own awkwardness and my lack of shyness.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So Hugh Grant's going to play me, and I hope I do it soon before he gets much, much older.
Because then we're going to have to find a new one.
I'm going to need, well, Brad Pitt was taken.
Love it. We really appreciate you coming on the show today, Eric.
Oh, this was fun. This was a lot of fun.
We look forward to having you again.
I hope so. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.